Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Well. My name is Betsy Cardenas, and I am one of your hosts. I am the co-founder of Born in June Creative. We are a digital and social media agency here in Los Angeles, and this is The Well. If you are listening to us for the first time, or if you are a recurring guest, we welcome you back to conversations with interesting creatives across Los Angeles and beyond. And today I'm super excited and thrilled to welcome Betty Avila to The Well. Welcome, Betty.
Thank you.
Betty and Betsy. This doesn't happen often.
That's perfect.
It's perfect. It's perfect. I grew up being called Betty for pretty frequently throughout my life. Was it Betty?
Nice.
No, it's Betsy. Is it short for something? No, it's just Betsy. Is Betty short for anything, or is just Betty?
No, my name's actually Berta,
Berta.
but I grew up at home being called Betty, and so I didn't know my real name until I started school.
Oh.
Yeah, but I've reverted back to Betty. That's the first name I knew.
So if someone says Berta, do you turn around?
I do. I totally do.
Okay.
Yeah, and my brother is the only person who calls me that in my usual world.
Or your mom when she's mad?
No, not even.
Not even.
Not even. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody calls me Chata, so that's I
Oh,
will
I
for
love
that as
it.
well. Yeah, because people couldn't say Betsy, so they were like
That's
Chata.
funny.
Anyway, I digress. Thank you so much for being on the show. You are the executive director of SelfHelp Graphics. So tell us about your role and about SelfHelp Graphics.
Sure. So SelfHelp Graphics has been around for close to 50 years. We're celebrating 47 this year. Started on the East Side by Sister Karen Bucalero, an art making nun, and a number of artists from the East Side, Chicano and Mexican. And I think they just saw a need to create space for artists, especially for Chicano artists who didn't have access to mainstream art spaces. And that continues to be very much part of our mission, and it's evolved and grown as well. And my role as executive director is really to ensure that we are able to fulfill the mission of the organization. So I'm bringing in the resources. I'm doing the really sexy, fun administrative stuff that keeps the engine running, so that our team can make the programming happen and our artists can do what they do.
Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
so the Self-Help Graphics obviously has deep roots in East Los Angeles, and I think one of the things that a lot of people don't know, or we aren't taught about, or isn't just readily available to us, even growing up as Angelinos, is the vibrant, I think, artistic community that has always existed in East Los Angeles and the Chicano art movement that I've actually
Yes.
learned more about as an adult and when I first came
Yeah.
to live in the East LA community 12 years ago. So I think that your organization serves such an important purpose because the narratives of Angelinos in general, I think, often get lost in the vast space of Los Angeles and the Hollywood narrative that is such a big part of the mythology around the city.
Mm-hmm.
So I love Self-Help Graphics and I love everything it represents and what it continues to bring to the community. But
Yeah.
we know that the artistic community was impacted by COVID. So can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on that and what the impact has been in the last 6-7 months now?
Yeah, absolutely. So Self-Help Graphics in a regular year will hire close to and sometimes over 100 artists. And we now have a cohort of part-time teaching artists who are part of our staff. And their role is really to be the public face of the organization. So they're doing our workshops, they're out in the community with our Barrio Mobile Art Studio. And that is all programming. I mean, we're seeing like 70, 80, 90 workshops a year. And all of a sudden, all of those hours went away for the artists, like literally in one day. We were like, well, we don't know when these are going to come back, like when we're able to reschedule. All of our partners that were hiring us to come out were like, we're closed. So the artist community was hit hard and hit fast. And as we know, artists are often primarily working in the gig economy. They're having to piece together their income through multiple jobs so that they can still have the time and the headspace to work on their own practice in ways that a full-time gig doesn't necessarily always allow.
Yes.
So for them, we understood very quickly that we would have to shift our immediate response to connecting artists to those resources that were becoming available, and even just like the skill set of like how do you apply for a grant. For a lot of artists, this was the first time they were even looking at those opportunities. So we had to really pivot to that direct artist support programming in the virtual realm in March. But I think we're still seeing even now the impact of the way that artists are not, I think, locally being seen as this critical resource to the community. And I'm very clear that artists are going to be who we're leaning on to get through and really process what's happening to us as a community.
Can you
Um,
can you go more into detail about that? Because I completely agree that art is something that brings us solace and helps bridge understanding and bring communities together. But tell
yes.
us more about that because I feel like so often, um, even as when we were starting out, and our agency is very heavily leaning on design, and it seemed
Mm-hmm.
like people always or either don't understand it or don't want to pay or
Mm-hmm.
even in my own small ventures into creative writing or just editorial pieces. I think there's always an assumption that these ideas are free and that this art is all should be free for consumption. So
Yes.
tell us more about that, about why, how is art going to be something that can help us get through these times?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think what you're describing is even more extreme when we're talking about artists of color and Latinx and Chicano artists, because there's an assumption that their work, which is a direct reflection of the community in some cases, that is in service to the community, and that service should be free. That you're doing it out of the kindness of your own heart and your own activism, and there isn't a sense of understanding that is work, that is labor. That creativity is labor too, and that these artists have to pay rent. They got to feed their families. So that's something that we deal with regularly. And I think it's just even more extreme right now, especially in the middle of a racial justice movement, when artists are having to step up so much more to move those messages, to keep inspiring people, to not lose hope and faith that change is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for us as an organization, I think we're really seeing we're having to find the opportunities to ensure that the artists that are doing that work are still getting paid. And even in times, that if it's not creative work, that we're still finding paid opportunities for them. But I'll give the example of artist Dui Tafoya and the collective Nisantas that we called on during that first weekend in June when we saw that uprising across the country and here in LA. And, Self-Help Graphics couldn't open our doors. We felt like our hands were tied. We were like, what do we do? And we called these artists to say, hey, will you create something that we can then in turn at least distribute? Even if we can't welcome people into our space to make their own posters for the marches and the activations that were happening at the time. And they came through. And I think we're seeing artists do that in the digital space, not just in person. The incredible I think there's a beautiful mirroring of this collective consciousness that we're seeing right now because of this racial justice movement. That it's almost like we take it for granted. And for self-help graphics, we feel that responsibility and that obligation to support the creative community who is bullying us. And I think a lot right now about the artists that are working with us on our Day of the Dead season, talk about a year to like honor loved ones who have passed on. And like just even strangers that we don't know that we've lost by literally the hundreds of thousands. Um, so that there, it's not just, I think, the labor of like the physical creation, but it's the emotional labor that some of these artists are taking on in processing with us and sometimes for us. And you see that really directly in, like the altares that you see pop up during Day of the Dead. You see it in other ways. I mean, I'm even just thinking about the rose installation that was in downtown during those Black Lives Matter protests, representing people who have passed away. So it's really it is what will bridge us into sort of these. I think the next step
Mhm.
for what's next. I think a lot about the artists who are grinding right now because of the election,
Mhm.
just trying to move a message of like, get off your butt and vote, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And then, like, I think a lot about the artists who are going to help us the day after, regardless of the outcome. So,
It's so true. I mean, I think when you one of the things that has personally affected me is the lack of, I think, opportunity for collective grieving,
yeah,
given the fact that we've lost over 200,000 lives. And as we know, Latinos and Black people have been disproportionately impacted by that. So that and the loss of wages and, um, we've been impacted and hit in so many different ways
right.
by this. And I think that you spoke something, you just said it so beautifully about artists helping us, doing the emotional labor of helping us process this grief,
Yeah.
that we aren't being, not only are we not being allowed the space to grieve, we're often being gaslighted by the people
Mm-hmm.
that should be helping us grieve together. So
Exactly.
I think that, that is so important for us to not expect other people to provide that for us from like government or the powers that be, as they say, but really, um, through your work and through the work of the artists that you're working with, helping us create those spaces for ourselves. Because as
Yeah.
we've seen, and I think the Black Lives Matter protests, um, brought this to light for a lot of people who maybe hadn't thought about it, but that literally the value of certain lives isn't regarded by this society or by this government, by, a lot of entities. And so I think that now more than ever, the Day of the Dead celebration is going to be so needed and so impactful for all of us. So thank you
Yeah.
for talking about that. Um, so tell us how that's going to happen this year, then, because usually you have, beautiful altars and artists, and it's a really meaningful gathering. I was actually
Yeah.
there with my family last year. So tell us
Yeah.
how you have been working to transform these experiences into digital experiences now.
Yeah. Definitely. The and I think there's been um, just a feeling of heaviness that we can't do this in person because it is such a community based experience where we have a month long series of workshops in person, usually, which all of which have been transferred to the virtual realm onto the SelfHelp Graphics YouTube channel. And even thinking about, the workshops can be free online, but what does it mean when a family doesn't have those materials? Or like they're not as readily available. And so we've created actually, or and are in process to create 2,000 art supply kits that can be picked up by the local community, so that their experience is completely free, and that they have everything there. Um, but in terms of the actual celebration itself, we are moving that online as well. It'll include the musical elements, which are so key and important to the celebration. We'll have a spotlight on the exhibition itself, which is also virtual, um, and a spotlight on our Noche de Ofrenda Grand Park partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And so that aspect of it, where typically we'll see 30 to 40 altars installed at Grand Park, has been scaled down, but they're still going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
They're We'll have 11 that is total. We'll still have the community altar. And we've invited partners like Black Lives Matter, like the South Central Farm, Community Power Collective, the East LA Women's Center, and others. Some are individual artists as well, to create altars that are speaking to the issue areas that they're dealing with and working with, and to honor the lives of the people that they want to highlight. But those will still be there. We just won't have the gathering. We won't have the program where we bring people on a particular night. The park is open, people can go through. It's just that really powerful experience of being in a shared space together with hundreds of people won't be part of that experience this year.
Well, I'm glad that you have been able to figure out ways to make this work so that people, even if it's on an individual basis, and I'm sure with safety, will be able to at least view some of this and then experience some of the elements online.
Yeah,
And I like that
yes,
you
definitely.
touched upon, I think, one of the very unique realities for our communities, which is that even if you're offering your programming online, there might be challenges to people having access to that or gathering the
Right.
materials. So I think that, that's one of the reasons why we are encouraging everyone to make a donation to SelfHelp Graphics to help keep your work
Thank you.
going. And I think that it's I know that you were on television recently talking about the impact to the entire art community and to the museum community. Can you speak a little bit about how this is impacting the larger, museum community at large, and kind of what's at stake right now if these institutions aren't funded? I mean, I always say by the government because I want them to pay for everything, but by us,
Yeah.
by the government. And what are some ways that we can help not just Self Graphics, but the larger community at large? Like I was thinking, I'll let you answer the question before I answer it for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very, it's a complex question. I think what's really come forward is just the fact that the system to support museums and other like cultural centers is really it it is dependent on people being able to go in person, to buy tickets, to pay for lunch at the restaurant there, and other types of income that require people going there in person. So we know already that there are some museums that will not make it out of this COVID time. Like that's just the reality. They don't have the sufficient funds. They don't have a rainy day fund to go to. And especially when you're looking at some of these smaller and culturally specific
Mm-hmm.
cultural organizations or museums, they are the most impacted by this because they're already receiving less funds than what we would call the like primarily white institutions, PWIs, where they're not funded significantly by the government. They're in the same sort of survival wheel that a lot of culturally specific nonprofits are in, and that I think that's going to be the thing that we will feel. We don't feel it right now because we're not able to go anywhere.
Yeah.
But once we're able to open up our doors again, we'll start to see who didn't make it out of this. And it's just like a super moment of highlighting that inequity that exists in the funding and where that the systems of funding sources go,
Mm-hmm.
that they don't go to these culturally specific organizations. And I think the other side of that is that yes, we're in a pandemic, but we're also in this incredible moment of reckoning within our society on race, on income. There's so many issues coming forward, and you have, I think, a lot of museums wanting to become relevant in that conversation when they're not really actually about those values. And so I think it is on the community to almost like sniff that out. Like if you are about Black lives, what are you doing about that? If you are about Black lives, why do you have a trustee on your board that is making, millions and millions of dollars off of overcharging prisoners who are mostly Black and brown men to make calls to home and to loved ones. I mean, it's a very real and heavy conversation. I think the other major reality for the museums that can open is that most of the externally facing positions, the people that are going to interface with everybody coming in, they're low wage hourly workers, and they're primarily people of color. So it's just putting us at risk again and again. Our communities, our
Yeah.
Latinx communities, the Black and brown communities. So yeah, it's a very layered question, and I think one that the museum sector and the cultural sector is going to be dealing with for far long after post COVID.
Yeah, and to your point, right? Like so many other things, it's just highlighting the inequities that were already there. So
Yeah,
the silver lining is that it's an opportunity for us to increase our awareness of, cultural institutions that maybe we have taken for granted, or we always assume would just be there, or haven't really given a lot of thought to if we're donating or not. Um, so I think that's a really important point to make, because it helps those of us not as intimate with the museum and art space. It helps us figure out like where we should maybe put our support, or if I'm
yeah,
thinking about making a donation to LACMA, maybe I should consider shifting that over to SelfHelp Graphics or to the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach,
right,
and think about that strategically, because as a parent and as an older sister, and I have 6 nieces, and I really think about the cultural legacy
yeah,
that we are so often robbed on. We're recording on, you know, Indigenous Day, which
yeah,
for the longest time in our childhood was Christopher Columbus Day. And I
right,
think about, the cultural legacy that has been robbed, um, that we are now, so many of us are trying to reclaim in our own ways.
yes,
Um, and so I think about how these cultural centers that are specifically geared towards, um, Black and brown people, how relevant and how important and crucial they're going to remain if we are
right.
going to, I think, change the course of this nation. I was listening to something that a majority of kids under 18, I think it was like 50, 60%, they don't know what the Holocaust is. And so,
Wow, that's terrifying.
I mean, it's terrifying on so many levels, right? But you think about the role of cultural institutions
Yes,
in preserving that history for the forthcoming generations, and I think that it's one of the most important. I mean, everything is important, but it's an important component, especially for those of us who are either creatives or adjacent to creative fields, for us to really think about that, and how we can incorporate that into our activism or into our actions that go beyond voting. Because to your point, right, like the work isn't going to stop after
right.
the election. Like we're not going back to brunch. I mean, I know a lot of us weren't at brunch every Sunday or whatever it was that they were saying at the after Hillary lost, but I think that it's really important for us to think about other ways that our activism can expand, and what
Yeah,
are some tangible ways. So I really
yeah,
appreciate you sharing that. I have one last question for you, not related
sure.
to any of this. Kind of actually, I have two questions. My first question is, what are some artists that you are looking at that are up and coming, um, that you're particularly excited about? They can be Chicano or Black, or um, and then what are the glimmers of hope that you see?
Yeah. Um, Man, that's such a hard question. There's so many artists to share about. I think an artist that inspires me in her work daily is Nani Chacon.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that she's emerging. I mean, she definitely is an established artist, but um, I think needs to be known by more and more people. She is indigenous, based out of New Mexico, and if you've ever been to SelfHelp Graphics or driven by it on First Street, you're very familiar with her Resist mural
Mm-hmm.
on the side of our building, and her yeah, her aesthetic is it's beautiful, it's empowering. She has a this incredible way of bringing her indigenous identity into her work. Um, explicitly or not. And she, yeah, we're actually to the point where, as we're planning the renovation of our building, working around that mural to make sure that it remains part of the community there. Um, Another artist that I would love to showcase, I already mentioned him, was Duita Foya.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's somebody that people sleep on a lot because he's not somebody who's taken the traditional, um, like art school path. He doesn't have an MFA, but he, I think, is very much in the legacy of self-help graphics, um, with this commitment to community, commitment to social justice. That's just part of his work, how he came up, from Boyle Heights. And he has such a way of addressing um, the issues that we're dealing with on a daily basis in a very like quirky, fun way. Even when it's really serious things. Like the Black Lives Matter poster that he created to distribute at SelfHelp Graphics was very simple. It just said, Orale, Black Lives Matter. And another one that he created was actually an image of the 1968 Olympics, that iconic image of the two Black men who were winning medals with their fists in the air and just showing solidarity. Again, bringing out those intersections between the Black and Brown communities. Super like fun and pithy work. So definitely want to shout him out. And then another artist I want to shout out is Gabby. Um, she grew up at SelfHelp Graphics, and I'm totally blanking on her last name right now. Um, Gabby Claro. She grew up at SelfHelp. She came out of our youth programming. She's this incredible um, artist who takes these very like cute and sweet types of images, but she's addressing serious things. She just created a gorgeous piece speaking to Black Lives Matter, and it's on a canvas where she has created two Black figures, and they're embroidered. The figures are embroidered, and they're on a canvas that is completely glitter black, and it says Black Lives Matter. So just the way that she's addressing these things, and in her style, just it's very like cute, but still like gothy and dark. Um, and yeah, she's done murals. She's been out in the community working with hundreds of people at a time, and she's still very young. So I'm so excited to see what she's going to do out in the world as she's able to get more experience and more support.
That's amazing. I can hear you talk about this all day, by the way. I'm like,
Yeah.
so I think I wanted you to highlight that specifically because one of the things that I have thought about more is, how do you fill your house with art and with imagery that
Yeah.
goes beyond what I think sometimes is the very obvious art to have. And, no disrespect to Frida or Diego or any of the icons,
Sure.
but I think that there's a lot of contemporary art and emerging art that, as we're thinking about what we fill our homes with and the significance of that,
Yeah.
I think that we should think about current artists, emerging artists, and think about if we have a little bit of extra cash, maybe for the holidays, we buy prints, or thinking about
Yes, absolutely.
how we can build a support system where we become patrons of
Yes.
the artists that are emerging or coming out,
Yeah.
or are currently successful in our communities. Like I see behind you, you have an Ernesto Llerena piece.
Yep.
I have one behind me too.
There you go.
So that's an example of how we can all, patronize,
Yeah.
not patronize, what is it called? Be a
No, yeah.
patron.
Yeah.
Be patronize,
It
I was
works.
like, that's another word. Like how you can be a patron of the arts.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
I was really privileged in that my mom loved art, so she immersed me in a lot of that culture. But
That's
looking back,
great.
it was mostly white artists and I think it's because that's kind of what she was seeing, and there wasn't a lot of access to other things.
Right.
But she always taught me, if you have a little bit of money, like, buy a print or invest, or
Yeah.
if she sees an artist that's painting on the side of the road, she's like, okay, pull over, I want to go see, and I want to, I want to support, because that is like such an important thing. And I think it's something that SelfHelp Graphics is cultivating in our community,
Yeah,
because I think there's so much conversation about the things that we're lacking in our communities, but I think that we also have so many stories and so much talent that is not being
totally.
harnessed adequately.
Yes.
So thank you so
Yeah.
much for the work that you do. So
No, thank you.
tell me your glimmer of hope.
My glimmer of hope. I mean, it really is the artists. I the artists that we get to work with, the work that they're creating. Um, I, speaking of kind of like sharing this notion of supporting artists and being a patron of artists of color, we did a call out for just for general art in like an affordable range, right? Like nothing over $100 or $120 for the holidays last year. And we said, bring your art, we'll put it on the wall, and like, we'll sell it. And this was an open call. We didn't have parameters other than it must be affordable. And we had a little boy who submitted a really awesome Star Wars image that he created. He must have been like 8 or 9 years old,
Mm.
and I can't really describe as well as I'd like to. I think the power that it is for somebody to see themselves reflected on like these art walls that often don't reflect our community. They don't reflect our many identities. And I loved watching this kid just be like, I'm here. And the best part of that day for me, and it's one of those moments that I remember, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm like, no, this is why we do this work, was when he came back around, to the gallery again after making the rounds with our artist vendors, to see that his piece had a little red dot on it because it had sold. And he lost it. This kid was so excited. And like, he didn't know it was his grandma that bought it. And he, it's all good. He didn't need to know. He just needed that moment of like a validation. And I hope that, he continues his artistic journey and that he continues to see himself in these spaces. And I think that's our job. And that's my glimmer of hope.
Oh, what a beautiful story.
Yeah.
You made me tear up a bit. I think it's so self-help graphics take all our money. So where can we give to self-help graphics and learn more about your work? Did you lose me?
I lost you for a second.
On that moving story, how can we give and learn more about self-help graphics and how we can support your work?
Yes. So you can go online to selfhelpgraphics.com and see all of our info there. Our Instagram and our Twitter handles are SHG1970. And I think definitely want to make sure that folks are considering purchasing art when it comes to the holidays. We're trying to work on already ways that we can that self-help graphics can be a platform for other artists to sell their work. Not just buying art from us, but really supporting the whole creative economy that exists on the East Side that we started this conversation with. So definitely more to come from Dia de los Muertos now to the holidays in just a couple of months.
Betty, thank you so much. I
Thank
really enjoyed
you.
this conversation, hearing more
Likewise.
about such impactful work, and thank you for everything that you do. Um, there you have it. You can follow Self Help Graphics on Instagram, and you can also visit their website and keep them in mind for your end of year donations. Definitely check out their Day of the Dead um, events and online classes, etc. And this is it for this episode of The Well. I'm Betsy. You can follow at Born and Dream Creative on Instagram or visit our website, www.bornanddreamcreative.com, to hear more about us. Thank you so much, Betty. Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye.